Today, again, we go back to our reinforced soil walls. So today, we will look at these aspects like the facing, connection, drainage, etc. First, let's look at the facing and connection stability design. So this is one failure mechanism which we have to check, that is the facing and connection stability. So we look at the facing panels, they may fail in bending or shear. And if you have segmental blocks, they may fail in shear. Then we may have various connection fixtures, like especially if you are using panels to connect the geosynthetic reinforcement to the panels, we may use different hooks type of arrangement. So this may fail in tension, bending, shear. It may pull out from concrete, or there will be bearing failure in concrete. That means the connection fixture which is inside the concrete, if it imposes very high bearing stress within the concrete, that will be another type of failure. Then crest toppling, that means the segmental blocks, gabions or geocells, etc., which if the height above the topmost reinforcement is more, it may overturn. Then connection failure, where we use the frictional type of connection in segmental blocks, gabions, geocells, etc. Then what are the loads coming on the facing? Because we know there will be horizontal pressure on the facing, which is directly exerted by the earth. Then the reinforcement is connected to the facing at the connection. So the tension will be there at the connection. And weight of superimposed facing units. At any level, there will be facing units above, which will impose the load. And sometimes what happens, the facing is somewhat rigid, whereas the fill, if it is not compacted properly, it may settle. So there will be a relative settlement between the fill and the facing. So the fill could exert shear stresses on the facing. Sometimes there are externally applied loads, like possibly impact or something like that. Then when there is a differential settlement, the facing units may get distorted. So this could impose additional stresses. So see, normally in the internal stability design, when we check for the rupture of the reinforcement, we determine the tensile stress which is developed in the reinforcement, which is at this point. The maximum tension is at the point where the failure plane or the maximum tension line intersects the reinforcement. So this is the maximum tension. So towards the facing, it may reduce somewhat depending on the flexibility of the facing, etc. And towards this side also it will reduce actually. So the load at the connection directly we are not determining. So normally we calculate the reinforcement tension, the maximum reinforcement tension. When we assume, for example, if it is FHWA, we assume the connection load as same as this reinforcement tension. Whereas BS, it may be slightly less. That I will show in the next slide. So if you look at the BS, it shows these sketches. If it is a tie-back wedge method, which is used for extensible reinforcement like geogrids, all facings with movement capacity or movement capacity and connections. So at the top, the connection load will be 75% of the reinforcement tension. That is the maximum reinforcement tension. At the bottom, it will be 100%. So we can, and in between, we can interpolate what is the load at the connection. Then stiff face, like segmental block walls and full height panels with no movement capacity at connections. So the connection load is considered to be 100% of the reinforcement tension. Similarly, the coherent gravity method also, we have this, like if it is flexible, 75%, then up to a depth of 0.6 h, then it becomes increased to 100% at the bottom. So if it is, we have discrete concrete panels, it will be 85% for a depth of this much distance, that is 0.6 times height. Then at the bottom, it is 100%. So from this, we can determine the connection loads. Then stiff face, like segmental block walls and full height panels with no movement capacity at the connections. Because in the case of segmental block walls also, we have shear connection between the units. Whereas if it is discrete panel, there is no shear transfer actually. because between two panels we have the elastomeric bearing pads, so some movement is possible. So from this we are able to determine the connection loads. So, and again I have to emphasize that like it doesn't mean the actual loads will be always this like that. It could be different. It depends on many factors. What is the stiffness of the connection? What is the stiffness of the facing? What type of soil it is? So it may depend on a number of factors. But when we design, we consider these loads of the connection. So if you have discrete panels, segmental panels, so here I have commonly we use panels of 1.6 meter height. That is because the maximum spacing which we normally use is 800 millimeters. So this panel size allows us to use the maximum spacing between the reinforcement. So there are two reinforcement layers, 0.8 meter, and 0.4 meter above and 0.4 meter below. So we can analyze it as a we consider this pressure distribution, and we can consider the connection loads as a reaction like that. So we can analyze it as a simply supported beam in this direction. We can analyze the shear force bending moments. So if you do this analysis, we find, and normally the bending moments are much less than the cracking moment in the concrete. Normally, the concrete, either we can assume it as a cracked section or an uncracked section. So when the bending moments are less than the cracking moment of concrete, or the induced tensile stresses are less than the tensile strength of the concrete, it is an uncracked section. So actually, if we analyze even up to 10 meter or 12 meter high wall, we can actually do the calculation, and you will find the reinforcement is not required at all. The concrete itself is able to carry the bending moments, but we have to provide some nominal reinforcement for shrinkage, temperature, etc. So that as per the IS 456 code, or as per IRC, whatever minimum reinforcement we have to provide. Because why the bending moments are less? Because the span of the beam is only 0.8 meter. Like that is very less actually. Then we have to design the connections. So we use different arrangements. So this is something known as a loop and toggle connection, which is used for geostrips or straps. So this type of connection is also used for, because nowadays the geogrid also, yesterday I've shown, like the geogrids also, we cut it into narrow strips, maybe 50 mm or 300 mm wide. So this type of connection is used for the geogrids also. So the straps comes and goes back like that. Same way, the geogrid also comes and goes back to the full length like that. So similar type of connection used for geogrids also. So here, these are called the loops actually, which are embedded into the concrete, and we can see this arrangement like that. Then there is a toggle bar like that. So this toggle bar, it will be subjected to bending, tension, and shear. So we have to analyze and provide adequate diameter. Similarly, the loops also, it will be subjected to, like here it will be subjected to shear, and these legs will be subject to tension. So we have to analyze for those stresses. Then inside, we'll have to check for pull out and bearing actually. So some of these calculations, like tension we can check, shear we can check, but how to check for pull out in concrete? Because of course we'll have to provide enough length in the anchorage in the concrete. Sometimes we do the test also. We conduct actual tests to verify how much mod loads this connection fail. So these type of connection standards. So like we have standard dimensions for different types of rates of reinforcement. Then we do certain pull-out test also to verify that this is safe. Similarly, other type of connections like geogrids. Then here we can slightly different arrangement actually. The loop is embedded into the panel, and this geogrids comes one way, it's looped around this and goes back to the full length. So Again, this will have to check for shear and tension, pull out, etc. from the concrete. And this is like you may be also aware, like a lot of failures are happening because of poor connections actually. Because nowadays, what is happening? The competition is very, very intense. So different agencies, they are trying how to reduce the cost. So sometimes, like some people, unfortunately, cut corners, and either the diameter is less, or probably the like the galvanization may not be proper, like that. So many failures have occurred due to this. Another issue could be sometimes they use recycled steel or re-rolled steel, so which may not have enough ductility. So when you bend this at the corners, there are excessive stresses. So that could be another reason of failure. So coming to segmental blocks, so this I mentioned the crust top line. So this is the topmost layer of reinforcement. So if you put too many blocks above, so that will overturn actually. So that has to be analyzed. Normally, uh, a good practice is to put a reinforcement below the topmost block. Sometimes when there are blocks, or especially when you have a sloping surcharge like this, then the risk is much more. So this has to be analyzed. And if you go to the NCMA manual, this is taken from the NCMA manual. So they have a procedure for doing this check. So this can also happen in gabions. See, normally gabions, suppose the height is 1 meter, width is also 1 meter, so it may not topple actually. But when you use geocells, suppose like the height is more compared to the width, this may happen. Then we have to check for the connection strength between the reinforcement and secondary blocks. Like here we have two different types of connections. Like one is frictional connection. That means the connection relies on the mobilization of friction between the secondary units and the geosynthetic reinforcement. Or we may use some mechanical fixtures. So friction, we have actually friction could be between geosynthetic and the concrete surface, or like sometimes we have hollow concrete blocks, so aggregate interlock will be there. Sometimes there is a shear key, so we will see in the succeeding slides. So here the surface of the concrete is plain actually. So here the connection strength is almost due to the friction between the geogrid and the concrete surface. So here we have hollow concrete blocks. So inside these spaces, hollow spaces, aggregate is filled. Like so, here we can see the aggregate will be there. Then the geogrid is put. So the next block will come and sit on this actually. So partly it may be concrete and partly it may be aggregate. So the aggregate develops a good interlocking with the geosynthetic reinforcement, and we get frictional resistance. Here, if you see, there is a shear key. So the geosynthetic reinforcement is put like this over this and that. And the next block will come and sit on top of this. So because the geosynthetic goes around this shear key, it may develop slightly more resistance compared to if it was a plain surface. Then we can have connection fixtures, what they call mechanical or positive connection. So we have this type of different, some may be patented like that, this type of fixtures, or this type of home connectors used with HDPE geogrids. Long back, probably in 1999, 2000, we did a project in Panavale. This was one of the, I think it was the wall height was something like 12 meters. So one of the tallest structures in India at that time. So we used this type of blocks and this type of connection fixtures. It was done by Metlon India for the Panavale bypass project, part of Mumbai-Pune Expressway. So sometimes we have this, we have large blocks. Inside there is a cavity. So the geogrid goes up through the cavity and back like that. So sort of a wraparound kind of thing. So this also will give a positive connection. Then where it is like frictional, it has to be tested actually. We have to conduct tests to measure the connection strength. So here, so we can see like two blocks. That the geosynthetic will be between this. Then it will be like we apply different normal force actually. So because the in the actual wall, the blocks above this will put vertical force actually. To simulate that, we can apply vertical force using a hydraulic jack or other arrangement. So we'll apply different vertical forces, then try to pull this out, and that from that we'll get the connections. So this shows the arrangement in plan actually. So this shows the blocks. So this is the pulling arrangement. So either force to try to pull it, then the force versus displacement will be measured. So this shows the graph actually, connection strength result. So in the x-axis we have the normal load, applied normal load. So we can see, so it is actually shown in ohms per feet. So different normal loads test will be conducted, then the corresponding strength will be measured. So here we have two, like one is the peak connection strength. So normally when you apply the force, we plot the force versus displacement will be plotted, and the peak that will correspond to the peak connection strength. Then earlier we also used to check serviceability. Like sometimes if the connection it displaces too much, that is also not good actually. So at a displacement of 20 mm, what is the connection strength? That used to be sort of a serviceability criteria. So those are shown this line. So this is something like our direct shear test, which we do in soil mechanics, like we apply a normal force, the shear strength, something similar. But this is a frictional connection. So as you increase the normal load, the connection strength also increases, but it is not linear actually. After some time, you find the failure may be rupture also. This type of lines, and this is unique actually. This relationship will be unique for each type of block and each type of reinforcement. And sometimes you have a particular family of products. For example, like tech fab manufacturers needed and PVC coated geothread, different strengths like 60 kilonewton, 80 kilonewton, 100 kilonewton. The products have a similar appearance of structure, but when you do the connection strength test, you will find that each product like 60 kilonewton will have a different type of curve, but 100 kilonewton may have a appreciably different type of curve. So each product and each type of block has to be tested. Then we have, from that we'll construct this idealized curve. It may be bilinear or trilinear, like this is another segment. After that, we assume this to be constant. So like this numbers, we will have like numbers and this angles like that. So this is like, we can say some sort of addition and sort of a friction angle, we can call it. So these values will be there. So when you do an actual design, so any layer of reinforcement, we can calculate, we have to calculate what is the normal load coming at that point. So that will be due to the weight of the blocks above this layer. So normally, if the inclination is less than, the battery is less than 8 degrees, we assume the weight of all the blocks are effective here. So if the block height is say 5 meters above this, we can take 5 into the average unit weight of the block. And again, the block may be, if it is a hollow block, it will be partly concrete and partly aggregate. So the average unit weight we have to calculate. So depending on that, we can calculate the normal load. But if the battery is more than 80 degrees, so there is a concept known as a hinge height. That means the full vertical weight will not be applicable here. So even the NCMA manual gives a procedure how to calculate the normal load in case where the battery is more. So once you calculate the normal load, we can come to this graph. We know what is the normal load, go to this curve. So this point will give us a connection capacity. So then there has to be a factor of safety. And if you are using the LRFD method, then we'll have to use sort of a resistance factor also. We have to compare with the factor connection loads. So if the capacity is more than the demand, then it is okay. Like if the strength is more than the connection load, it is safe. Otherwise, either we will have to reduce the spacing actually. Or another option is we can go for secondary reinforcements. That means, so here the geogrid tension, that is okay. You've got sufficient tensile strength, but it is failing in connection. So to relieve the connection loads, we can put short length of reinforcement like secondary. That is another option. In an actual project, we have to check for the connection strength. That is very important. Next, we come to like serviceability. So here there are two aspects. One is settlement. That means how much the wall moves vertically. Like that will be mostly due to the compression of the foundation soils. Like if it is like a dense sand, settlement will not be much. But if it is like soft clay or silt, we can expect appreciable settlement. Some settlement also could occur due to the compression of the fill itself. But if the fill is properly compacted, then it will not be much. It will become significant when the height is more. Suppose if it is a 50-meter or 100-meter high structure, then the compression of fill also could be significant. Otherwise, normal when it is 10-meter or 15-meter high structure, then we don't expect much internal compression of the fill, provided it is properly compacted during construction. Then another aspect is the lateral displacements. There will be some lateral displacement of the wall, which may be partly due to, like we know, the reinforcement, partly due to during the construction, there will be some displacement. Like when you place and compact the fill, it will undergo some lateral displacement. Then after that, post-construction also, sometimes due to the creep of the geostatic reinforcement, there could be some continuing deformation. Also, if you use very fine-grained soils like silt and clay, they also continue to deform with time. So, like when we do the limit state design, we have to ensure that whatever, like whether the settlement or lateral deformation, these are within the acceptable limits. So, like we know, like foundation engineering, that it is actually the differential settlement which controls, which induces this, like additional stresses or cause damage to the structure. So fortunately, the reinforced soil structures, they have got very good tolerance to differential settlement. So here we can see like when we say tolerable settlement, the soil itself, it is a flexible material. It can accept a fairly large amount of settlement without any problem. Mainly, the allowable settlement of reinforced soil wall will be controlled by the allowable settlement for the facing. So if it is a full height panel, it has got relatively low tolerance. It is something like 1 in 200. So that means, what it means is, over a length of 200 meters, there could be a differential settlement of 1 meter. It is like not small, it is large actually. If we have discrete panels, the segmental panels, and the panels are not tight fitting actually. Normally we leave a joint gap of 20 mm. That means on the horizontal printing planes, we put a bearing pad of 20 mm thickness. And on the sides also, there will be a gap of 20 mm. So this is provided so that when the panels settle, so it may get slightly distorted like that. So if the panels are tightly fitting, then additional stresses may introduce and the panels may crack. But if there is a sufficient gap for the panels to adjust, it can accommodate something like 1 in 100. So that means over a distance of 100 meters, horizontal distance of 100 meters, the differential settlement could be 1 meter. It's a fairly large amount actually. But if we have something like a wraparound type of facing or elliptical steel face units, we can go up to 1 in 50. So this is the general guidance for differential settlement. Then coming to the lateral displacement, normally these are from the BS. If you look at the FHWA, they don't give any guidance on this. They don't say what is the allowable settlement or allowable lateral displacement. We are silent on that, assuming like it is the responsibility of each designer to evaluate that for a specific project. The BS provides these guidelines. Even for the lateral displacement, this is actually post-construction creep strains. That means after the construction of the structure is complete, whatever strains which occur after that should be less than this limit. If it is for a normal retaining wall, it should be less than 1%. If it is supporting bridge abutments, that means if it is a true abutment, that means the bridge deck itself is sitting on the reinforced soil wall, it should be less than 0.5%. And now how to calculate this post-construction creep strain? So we use what are known as the isochronous curves actually. So here what the manufacturer does, he will conduct creep test at different stress levels. So here the y-axis shows stress as a percentage of the ultimate tensile strength. So we can conduct some creep test at 30% of the ultimate tensile strength, 40%, 50%, etc. Then we will construct these curves actually. So here this uppermost curve is our normal tensile test. That means if you put a specimen in a tensile testing machine and we stretch it at a particular rate of displacement. So we get this curve. So this for different times actually, 1 hour, 10 hour, etc. like that. So now if you want to estimate the post-construction strain, first I have to identify what is the end of construction. So I am assuming it is something like 1000 hours, something like 25 days. So that is this curve. I come along like this. So for me, this is a starting point. Then I look at what is the design life of the structure. So this will be 10 raised to 6 hours, which corresponds actually to 114 years. So normally we know for a bridge, design life is say 100 or 120 years. So from here to here, what is the post-construction strain? So this we can say it is actually maybe around say 0.6% or something like that. Whereas our allowable limit is 1%. So this is safe. Accordingly, we can check for the post-construction creep strain. And we have the IRC guideline. So they have specified a limit actually. The post-construction settlement of the founding soil should not exceed 100 mm for discrete panels and blocks. So this is actually the total settlement. So, but I have been looking at this problem like so for the because like we are also formulating a code of practice for the BIS actually. So we are also discussing, debating whether to put a limit or to put limit. Should it be total settlement? Should it be differential settlement like that? We are also studying. So when I looked at some of the case histories, there are a lot of cases where the reinforced soil structures have undergone a lot of settlement, like 300 mm, 400 mm, up to 600 mm, and still perform well actually. So it is not that 100 mm is very damaging like that. The structure itself can undergo appreciable settlement. Then it depends, like whether the payment or if it is supporting a railway track, how much we can allow. So it affects. Ultimately, it may be governed by the whichever facility which is being supported by the reinforced soil structure. So it is a fairly complex issue. Because it depends on like how to even calculation of settlement itself is a task because like like we may assume some data, but whether we are actually calculating and what is the actual settlement, that also vary widely. And what is the permissible settlement for a structure, that is also it is depends on many factors. And another issue is suppose I specify a very stringent requirements. So like suppose I demand, okay, the structure should not settle more than 100 mm. Then to ensure that we may have to go for ground improvement, which may cost a lot of money actually. So like if you are putting a very, very stringent criteria, it may be possible that we may waste precious resources in ground improvement. So somewhere we have to have a balance. Like, so it has to be safe, at the same time, it has to be economic. Then another important aspect is durability, because we have seen like safety is the first, then we have looked at serviceability, then durability. So here we have to look at the various components. See, first, if you look at the reinforcement, so we are designing on the basis of long-term design strength. So that way, the reinforcement we are guaranteeing, okay, for the, because we look at the environment, we look at the design life, accordingly we are applying a reduction factor for durability, so that we know the reinforcement will perform for the entire design life. So this part we are taking care of the design. Then we have to ensure the durability of the facing. The facing may be concrete. If it is concrete, there are different mechanisms like a freezing thaw. Like if it is a cold country, like if the concrete absorbs water during winter, it may freeze. So over a number of freeze thaw cycles, it may disintegrate. There will be things like alkali aggregate reaction. So that parts. So the aggregates, everything we have to ensure that is okay. Then if it is metallic, something like welded wire mesh or gabions, the issue is primarily corrosion. So we have to take proper care. If it is permanent welded wire mesh facing, we have to provide adequate sacrificial thickness, proper galvanization. Similarly, if it is gabions, galvanization plus preferably PVC coating, depending on the design level, etc. We have to. And wherever we have exposed geosynthetic, like a wraparound facing or geocells, then mainly degradation mechanism is weathering, that exposure to atmosphere. Mostly it is the degradation due to ultraviolet rays. So this aspect we have to take care. We have to assess the life or protect it with vegetation. Like if the geosynthetic is covered with vegetation, then it will have a much more longer life. Then the connections. See, wherever we are using metallic connection fixtures, again, main issue is corrosion. So we have to ensure that. Sometimes we may use polymeric fixtures. Like, for example, I have shown in the segmental blocks, we have some polymeric fixtures. So we have to ensure that it has got sufficient read life. It will not fail after 30 years or 50 years. Then fill as such, we don't expect much problem except when it has some organic content. Like if there is organic content, it may decay with time. But normally we take care. We don't allow organic content in the fill. So this will be taken care of. Drainage, we may use granular drains. So like we have to ensure that it will not get clogged during its life. That means is a granular drain, either we have to have a filter or we have to ensure that the gradation satisfies the filter criteria. We may use geotextile filters or geocomposite drains. So again, we have to ensure that it will not get clogged, weathering or chemical degradation. See, normally it is not exposed, but sometimes you feel geotextile filter is put at the panel joints actually. So again, even though it is not totally exposed, so there could be some partial exposure. So that part we'll have to take care. Then it should not get clogged and chemical degradation. So normally, if it is polypropylene, we don't expect some problem. If it is virgin polyester also, we don't expect a problem. But sometimes if we are using recycled polyester, then probably we may have to be a little careful. Whether it has the, like if you are using a structure with a 100 years design life, that geotextile has a life of 100 years has to be. So these are the things we have to give extra attention. Because at the panel joints, we put a geotextile filter. So if it degrades and fails after 20 years or 30 years, then what do we do? How do we repair that? So these are all issues. Sometimes we put perforated pipes, so it may get crushed or it may get clogged actually. Suppose the sand or fines enters and deposit in that, then it may have a problem. So here also, like providing adequate slope for the pipe is important, because like we have heard about what is that, what do you call like non-settling, non-scouring velocity. Like if the perforated pipe has the required longitudinal gradient, inside that water will flow at a sufficient velocity so that fines will not be deposited. But if you are installing it horizontal, sometimes if fines get deposited, it may get clogged over a period of time. And other components also. One example is the EPDM bearing pads, which we put between the panels. Use a low quality panel. Sometimes what happens, so there is no design for this. So some people may use a low quality material. So after some time, after 5 or 10 years, if it fails, again, it will create problem. So all these components we have to select with care. So ensuring that it will last for it will properly function for the full design life. Next, let's go to drainage, which is an important part. So a lot of studies show that a large number of failures of reinforced soil structures are due to connected with water. So for example, this corner paper is there, 2013. It analyzed 320 failed reinforced soil walls with geostatic reinforcement. It says 63% of failure is caused by internal or external water, and 73% used poor backfill, like silt and clay with a lot of fines. So that means when we have a combination of fine grain fill, that means with the more fines and water, there is you can expect trouble. Then how does water affect the performance? So there are many phenomena here. One is the increase in unit weight, then reduction in suction, because the partially saturated soils, the pore pressure is negative, so it has a lot of suction or apparent cohesion. So when it gets saturated, you lose that strength. That is why, like, when do we read about failure of retaining structures? Mostly during the rainy season. So this is one of the reasons why. Then it will increase in, if there is standing water within the reinforced soil wall or any other retaining wall, it will increase the hydrostatic pressure is there. Then if water flows, seepage pressure, then internal erosion. Because when water flows, it may carry fines along with that. So it could remove the soil, leading to settlement disease. There could be scour, like especially adjacent to rivers, etc. Then susceptibility to liquefaction. Like, of course, like say normally foundation soils, this is okay, but the reinforced soil itself, fill itself, normally be compact, so liquefaction should not be an issue. Then water will accelerate corrosion and degradation of reinforcement. So in the presence of water, this corrosion will be more. So let us do a simple calculation, like how much effect in unit weight, how earth pressure will be due to water. So lateral earth pressure is Ka into gamma H. So gamma, we have this formula like that. So assume G is equal to 2.65, E is equal to 0.4. Let us assume a well compacted soil. So if it is dry soil, that means S is equal to 0, then our unit weight, dry unit weight will be 18.6 kilonewton per. And if when it becomes saturated, S will be 1, so our gamma will be 21.4. This means an increase in unit weight of 15%. That means the pressure will increase by 15%. Okay, like factor of safety reduced, but this may not cause failure of wall. So normally sliding, we have a factor of safety of at least 1.5, overturning factor of safety of 2. So this will not cause failure of wall, but still will reduce the factor of safety. Now, if you have hydrostatic pressure, so again, let us do a simple calculation and let us assume phi is equal to 32, gamma, bulk unit weight is 20. So for the moist soil, this like Ka will be 0.3. So lateral earth pressure will be K into gamma H. So it will be 0.3 into 26. So it is 6 times the height. That will be the lateral pressure. So if you have standing water, then the submerged soil, it will have a unit weight of 10. So the lateral earth pressure due to the submerged soil is again Ka into gamma dash into H. So it will be 3 times H. In addition, we will have the hydrostatic pressure to the water, which is equal to gamma W into H, which is 10H. So total lateral pressure will be that due to the soil plus water is 13H. So here we have 6 times H, here we have 13 times H. That means the earth pressure has doubled. So now we know the wall is going to fail because sliding factor safety normally it is like around 1.5 only, and even overturning also factor safety is only 2. So if this condition develops and we have designed for this, the wall is going to fail. Then I am talking about 3 situations with respect to water. Like, see, one is the reinforced soil wall is above the water table. Second situation is the water table may come into the reinforced soil wall. Third situation is reinforced soil wall is exposed to a water body like a river. In the first situation, so here this is like an approach embankment. One of the most common application of reinforced soil walls is to retain the approach to a flyover or an ROB, that means road over rail bridge. So here the structure is above the ground level. Only a small embed will be there, typically 1 meter. That most groundwater table will be here at the ground level. So the most of the structure is above the groundwater, and the only water which will be entering the structure is the rain, actually. Of course, otherwise any leaking pipe or something, that could be another reason, but mostly only rainwater. So the rainwater will fall on the surface, and if it is a highway, either we'll have an asphalt or concrete pavement. So some water will run off, like it will be go to the drainage system and come like that. But when the pavement has some joints, it may have some cracks, it may have some porosity, so some amount of water will enter. And also we have to consider, like, like during the construction, it may experience 1 monsoon. That means before the pavement is constructed, it may experience 1 monsoon. See, normally the project takes something like 1.5 years or up to 2 years to be completed. So during construction, it may experience 1 monsoon. That time, more water may enter this. So to analyze this condition is complicated. See, normally when rain falls, this is unsaturated, so it will be most of unsaturated flow. The water will, like, we have something known as a field capacity of soil. So some moisture will be retained by the soil. When it is saturated, slowly. So that means the wetting front will slowly move downwards. So here the usually what we do in India, like we provide a drainage layer behind the panels or the blocks. Like that. Behind the facing, we provide a drainage layer. So earlier we used to provide something like 300 mm to 600 mm aggregate. Now, as per MORTH, minimum specification is 600 mm aggregate. As an alternative to this, people are also using geocomposite drains. So some people provide a perforated pipe at the bottom. Some people, they are not providing like that. Both sides will be drained. So what is assumed that any water which is coming inside this go to the drainage layer and will be taken out. And remember, like the reinforced soil, so normally the fines is less than 15%. So this entire zone has got fairly good permeability. So it will also act as a drainage layer. So for this situation, because the amount of water which entering may not be much, the situation is not that critical. So the second case is, like, for example, if you have a hill road, like a retaining structure here, like that, and we have a road above this. So, and if the groundwater table is at a relatively high elevation, it may come into the reinforced soil structure. So now we don't want this situation. Like here, if we allow the groundwater to come into this, then there will be excess hydrostatic pressure. We have to design a drainage system so that this water is intercepted and diverted. Also, rainfall also will entering this. We have to cater for that also. So this is taken from the BS code. Like, so normally they give 2 or 3 situations. So the seepage is less actually. So the groundwater table is not there. If some small seepage comes, so no need of any special drainage. That means the reinforced soil block itself, because it has got reasonably good permeability, that will be able to, any water entering this will flow through this and go to the drainage outside. Nothing extra need to be done. Then medium water inflow. So here we provide a horizontal, like, so bottom we can see trench. It need not be a continuous drainage blanket. We can provide trenches at regular intervals, or even nowadays we have this pipes or other sort of rectangular slotted pipe type of products are there. We can use that also. So this will be intercepted, come to this, and horizontally disposed of. So when there is high water inflow, then we have to provide a chimney drain. So now, like, it will be a continuous drainage blanket and chimney drain, because a lot of flow is there. It has to be taken out. So depending on the height of water table, what is the inflow, like, we have to design a drainage system. And the most critical condition is when the reinforced soil structure is exposed to a water body. Like, suppose if it is an approach to a river bridge, like that, then we know, like, during flood season, outside water may be there. So during the dry season, groundwater table may be somewhat low, and the river, it may be dry, or it may be here somewhere here, like that. But during the rainy season, the groundwater will rise, and when a flood comes, actually, so here the water level could be much more, and actually water could be flowing inside from the river to the ground. So here we have to take many additional precautions. One is we have to design for sudden drawdown. So normally the flood has come, so after some time it will recede. Actually. So the water level here in the water body, the river or adjacent area, it will drop at a relatively faster rate than the water level inside. Because here it is controlled by the permeability of the soil. So if it is very coarse gravel, it will drop fast. If it is sand, much lower. And if it is silt, it will take a lot of time for the water level to drop. So here we have a situation, water level outside is at a much lower elevation compared to the water level inside. So this is a critical condition. So we have to check for, like, stability, overturning, etc. with this type of condition. Normally, some guidelines give what should be the differential head, actually. So if you look at the, I think it's AASHTO, even the MSCW program, we check for a differential head of 0.9 meters. So probably what should we do at the, like, inside water level will be at the highest flood level, then outside water level will be 0.9 meter below. Then we have to analyze for sliding. We have to take some more precautions. One is, even the FHWA guideline insists use of a free draining fill. That means free draining fill is recommended in the zone of submergence. That means up to the high flood level, we have to use a free draining fill. And the definition of free draining fill is fines should be less than 5%. That means percentage passing 75 microns should be less than 5%. Because as the fines content increases, the permeability of the soil drops drastically. So normal reinforced soil fill is, like, it has to be less than 15% fines. But whenever it is, if it is going to be submerged, we have to ensure that the fines is less than 5%. Then we have to provide scour and erosion protection. That means when water flows at a high velocity outside, if grounds there is scouring, the reinforced soil structure may be undermined and it may fail. So we have to we have to provide wall embedment depth below the scour, or we can provide, like, scour protection apron. Then we have to provide proper filters. Like, we don't want any internal erosion or piping, actually. So proper filters we have to provide both inside and also below the aprons. All these precautions have to be taken. So if you look at the strategies for managing water in reinforced soil structures, like, one is try to minimize the entry of water into the reinforced soil zone. So this we can do by having a proper surface drainage system, like we have proper slopes, then we can have like ditch drains, etc., to remove as much water as possible. And sometimes we can use an impervious barrier slightly below the surface so that water does not enter into the reinforced soil zone. Then second is remove water quickly from the reinforced soil zone. Like, okay, water has, we cannot prevent the entire water from entering. So even if water enters, it should flow out quickly. So for this, use fill of high permeability. Like earlier slide, we have seen use free draining zone. And also one of the reasons why are limiting the fines to 15% is in normal type of walls is it should have sufficient permeability. Then we can use subsurface internal drainage. So earlier we have seen wherever the groundwater table is there, sometimes you have used chimney drainage blankets. Design for higher hydrostatic pressure. Suppose like even with all this like, develops hydrostatic pressure, we have to design for that. But this is going to be very, very costly. Then design for sudden drawdown wherever applicable. Like for the third situation we have seen when there is a during a flood season, there is a sudden drawdown. We have to design for that. And proper scour, erosion, and piping protection. Then there is detailing. So the main design is over. Like we have checked for like stability, serviceability, but there are a lot of details to be taken care of, and each of this is very, very important. Sometimes even when we ignore a minor aspect, it could lead to trouble. Like we have a highway structure, we'll have crash barriers, railings, etc. Sometimes we may have to fix poles for communications or lighting, like that. We have to make arrangements for that. And protection of facing from vehicle impact. That means side there is a service road. So if a vehicle comes and hits the facing panel or block, what will happen? So normally we provide a curb adjacent to the panel. And there are some obstructions to laying the reinforcement. There are structures within, like some, for example, like there are some poles which are embedded in the soil. So it may obstruct with the reinforcement. So how to handle that? In a leveling pad, the top there is a coping beam because top level will be varying. We have to achieve that. And when we change the founding level, because ground level will be varying, and we have to provide 1 meter embedments. So there could be a step in the leveling pad how to do that. Similarly, change in wall top elevations. Corners. The corners could be right angle, it could be acute, it could be obtuse. So there is a detailing there. And slip joints, because if the settlement is slightly more, then at intervals, 20 meters or something, we provide slip joints. That means a gap in the facing so that settlement can be accommodated. Drainage ditches, drainage outlets, like there is a perforated pipe inside, it has to be taken out. Or sometimes there is a culvert crossing the reinforced soil wall, so the water should not cause erosion like that. Then rodents protection. Sometimes people have this concern, like what if rats come and eat the reinforcement? Will it cause an issue? So whenever we have this perforated pipes, and outlets, weep-holes, etc., it should be protected so that rats don't come in. Sometimes we have to put the wall on a pile cap actually, or the footings of the bridges, like bridge piers or flyover piers, etc. Or the facing has to be put on a box culvert or pipes, culvert pipes, etc. Curves, when the facing is on a curved alignment, how to detail that. Then the reinforcement structure may have to abut a pier or a box, like a box structure. So the detailing of the joint. So all these details require attention, and we have to take care to show this in the drawings actually. So when we show all these details in the drawing, then at the site also people take care. But sometimes if it is left to the site supervisors, then they may not do it properly like that. So then the designer has to prepare all these detailed drawings with all the details. That is also a very, very important part of design. So not only the calculation is important, all this detailing is also equally important. So, so we have seen something about the design of reinforced soil structures, and so if you compare our normal, like conventional retaining wall, for example, the RCC retaining walls, which are very popular, like RCC cantilever or counter. In what way our reinforced walls are different? The design principles are same, like everywhere, like safety, serviceability, durability. Those are common for both. But in the design, there are some important differences. One is like if you're designing a reinforced soil, reinforced concrete retaining wall, then the materials are steel and concrete. So it is easy to test both materials. Like steel, of course, is a very standard material manufactured as per various standards and the properties. It's elastic, tensile strength, elastic modulus. It's all standard, and it's a simple test only. Tensile test, any material testing lab can do that. And concrete, all the properties of concrete comes from the crushing strength. That means we take cubes, determine the compressive strength, which can be done at the site itself. Like any site will have a cube testing machine. So from the compressive strength of concrete only, all other like bond strength, shear strength, modulus of elasticity, everything comes from that. So it's very simple to test. So any type of new cement, anything is not a problem at all. It can be tested. But in the case of a geosynthetic reinforced soil structure, the design is based on the long-term design strength. So it will have ultimate design strength, then so many reduction factors, reduction factor, insulation damage factor, durability reduction factor, like that. Then interface friction, connection strength. All these are fairly expensive tests, and some things are very time-consuming also. So on a specific project, we cannot do this test. The only test probably we can do is test for the tensile strength. All other details are normally supplied by the manufacturer. So we have to take care in selecting a proper product actually. See, as long as the manufacturer is reliable, there is no issue. And we can also take, there are some certifications, there are bodies like VBA, NDPEP, they certify the test results. Also, we can also take the independent test reports from the manufacturer to ensure that we are using the proper parameters. Then, in the case of conventional walls, soil is only a retained material. So even if it is slightly more fines or compaction some issue, okay, the pressure may increase, but the structure may still, it's okay. But in the case of reinforced soil wall, like soil is a structural element actually. So we have to be much more careful in selecting the fill material, properly compacting it in a reinforced soil structure. So just to recap, so we have looked at the facing and connection stability, like what are the forces, different type of connection arrangements, then the connection testing, and in the case of frictional connections, how to check for connection strength, then serviceability, that means settlement, and the lateral displacements criteria, importance of durability, different components, and importance of detailing we have seen. So, of course, this is while doing an actual design, we have to take care of all these details. And we have seen like a two important difference between conventional retaining walls and reinforced walls. Like reinforced soil walls, we have they have great advantages. Like there is great economy, lot of flexibility, like lot of very versatile technology, but we have to take slightly more extra care in design, especially in the soil. That I conclude.